Welcome everyone, so glad you're here. We're in week 5 of our series Wreck the Roof. If you haven't downloaded the booklet to follow along, make sure to go to wrecktheroof.org to download it. It'll make your experience so much better. And speaking of experiences, we've been making a lot of changes behind the scenes here online. We're making brand new Apple TV and Roku apps that should be ready in a couple of weeks that will be so much better, cleaner, and all around just a great experience. So for those of you that regularly watch on either of those devices, we're glad to have you, and we'll have an announcement on how to download those new apps when they come out. We've also updated our player on the Crossing.tv website in an effort to bring a more robust player that's more compatible with people who have slow internet while keeping everything smooth and looking good so that nothing gets in the way of your experience here online. Anytime you make changes, there's always going to be bumps in the road. So bear with us if there's any hiccups as we strive to bring you the best experience that we possibly can. All right, now let's get into some amazing worship before we wreck our roofs.
You're stacking stone on this foundation. We rest on Christ alone, bind us together. Lord, build your home. You build with broken bricks. You're stacking stone on this foundation. We rest on Christ alone, bind us together. Lord, build your home. In you we belong. You are our cornerstone. Every person, old and young, every nation, every tongue, no matter where we've been or where we're from, oh, your love holds us together as one. So we will not lose heart. Hell has no power when you are building your home. Every person, old and young, every nation, every tongue, no matter where we've been or where we're from, oh, your love holds us together. Sing with your voice, as one make a joyful noise. And even on that day when troubles come, oh, your love holds us together as one. Oh, together as one. Oh, we belong. You are our cornerstone. Every person, old and young, every nation, every tongue, no matter where we've been or where we're from, oh, your love holds us
Well, how's everybody doing today? You guys doing good? So glad to be able to worship with you guys today. If you're excited to be at church, let me hear a whoop whoop. At all of our locations, I hope you guys are joining in, and we're so glad that we get the opportunity to hang out with you. I also want to do a very special shout out to those of you who are part of our .tv family, to those of you who are part of the Crossing Online, and of course, we absolutely love our family that are part of the Crossing Inside. Every single time we get to see the number of baptisms that are happening inside of that ministry, our church at all of our locations erupts with joy. We could not be more thankful for you and that we get to partner with you in making the gospel of Jesus Christ famous. We are in week 5 of Wreck the Roof, and this sermon series has been so good to me and so good to my family, and I'm hoping it has been a blessing to you guys as well. I actually, if you're here today and maybe you haven't received one of our big booklets, or maybe you forgot yours at home, there's a way for you to be able to engage at a higher level during this sermon, and there's still time to engage in this sermon series. And so there are people at all of our different locations right now that have these big booklets. And if you don't have one, would you guys just raise your right hand, and the people at our different locations will get you one of those. Go ahead and raise your hand. All of our different locations, we want you guys to be able to get this because we're going to be in pages 42 and 43 of the booklet. I had an opportunity to meet with a couple who, after hearing the vision, kind of went on a little getaway. They scheduled it and they immediately took off, I think a couple weeks after they had heard the vision, but this was not a normal getaway. They had heard what we were planning on doing through Wreck the Roof, and they decided to do a little getaway and figure out what it would look like for them to wreck their roof. And so they gathered up all of their financial information and they went away for a weekend, and they started to work through it with the whole purpose of trying to figure out what they could do to retire early so they could be full-time difference makers at the camp for free. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, isn't that incredible? You know who you are. Your story keeps challenging me and inspiring me as I'm trying to wreck my roof. So to those of you who know, well, you know who you are. I just want to tell you, God bless you. That story is a great story. In fact, last Wednesday night, as I was preparing for our virtual life group that goes with the Wreck the Roof series on Facebook Live on Wednesday nights, as we're setting it up in the house and it's kind of chaos, I hear my wife talking to my boys 4 and 6 about wrecking the roof. And last night, because it's commitment weekend at all of our locations for our kids, my kids were getting out their piggy banks. And they were shaking the money out and doing the negotiation. We're going to be talking about it today, and I just realized that one of my kids is the bad guy in the story, because they get the same amount of money for all their Christmases, but all of the 50s ended up in one kid's piggy bank, and the other kid just had coins because he liked the coins, and my older son's like, Daddy, he likes the 50s. And so we had to redistribute the wealth before they could actually do their sacrificial giving. But and they were upset because they have their Wreck the Roof tubes that they're trying to, and the dog, yeah, that's right, we got a dog. The dog took those out, and so they had to put them in Ziploc baggies. And but their hearts, and then we got to pray about it, but their hearts for people to find Jesus are so pure. And listen, my kids are just as much heathens as your kids are. And so I just want to do a special thank you to all the people serving in our children's ministries who are helping them go on the same journey that we're going on, to instill in our kids at a very young age a heart of generosity. So I'm super thankful for that. Well, the sermon that we get to talk about today is kind of ironic because of all the people in the world, I shouldn't be the one who preaches a sermon on this guy. But before I jump all the way into that, you got to know next weekend at all of our different locations is commitment weekend. And I'm telling you, that weekend is going to be absolutely transformative for every single one of you that's here. And I know that there may be a lot of things that are going to get in your way or that maybe could try and pull you away, but I want you to make it a priority to be here next weekend. For those of us that were at Advanced Commitment Night, we just know how powerful that moment is. And it's going to be one of those things that we're all going to look back on years from now and go, it was in that moment, and I don't want any of you to miss it. So make a commitment now that you're going to be here and be part of it. But let's jump right into this story. How many of you guys at all of our different locations, you've heard the story of Zacchaeus? Yeah, and if you know anything about Zacchaeus, someone who is 6'6", probably shouldn't preach that sermon, but here we go. Luke chapter 19. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. Now Zacchaeus, that name means pure, clean, innocent. And you're going to find out a little bit later that he could not have had a worse name for his occupation. But there are some people that have a perfect name for their occupation. I did some research this past week, and I found there is a volunteer firefighter whose name is Les McBurney. How cool is that? There is a contractor in Indiana whose name is Paul Schwinghammer. Yeah, how cool is that? But my all-time favorite is in Austin, Texas. If you look up a dentist, you will find a dentist in Austin, Texas by the name of Chip Silvertooth. How cool? Yeah. Preacher McPreacherson would have been a cool name. Okay, now, Zacchaeus, he was a chief tax collector. His name is pure, innocent, and clean, but he is a chief tax collector and was wealthy. Now, when you hear tax collector, and this is a perfect season for this, many of us think IRS agent. I've never met an IRS agent. If there is an IRS agent at one of our locations, you are still welcome to continue to attend. But right now, most of us are going, we're frustrated by how much we're not getting back in our return, or you're frustrated because you're having to pay in and you thought you'd actually be getting stuff back. I don't know if IRS agents have friends, but it's doubtful. And I get that. You got to do what you got to do. But this is way worse than that. We think IRS agent. It is way, way worse. Here's what I need you to do. I need you to visualize living in the same house you live in right now in the United States of America. And now I want you to think about you living in the same house on the same street in the United States of America, but we are occupied by a foreign government. In our present political climate, imagine it would be Russian or it would be North Korea. And you walk out of your house to get ready to go to work, and you see officers in North Korean military garb patrolling the street that you live on. That's the tone. And one of our fellow Americans has taken upon himself to collect taxes from you and me to pay to the North Korean or Russian government. And the way the system worked is the tax collector, he would promise Russia a certain amount of money, and then whatever he collected in addition to that amount of money was his to keep. That's exactly the setting that we find ourselves right here in Luke chapter 19. Zacchaeus is a Jewish man living in Israel that is occupied by the Roman forces. And he is a tax collector, not for Israel, but for Rome. And so one of our fellow countrymen has become a traitor, a thief, who is exploiting his own countrymen for his own personal benefit. And he's good at it because he's, everybody say this word at all of our locations, wealthy. But not only that, he is getting wealthy while his own people are getting oppressed financially and physically. But he's also a chief tax collector. So he's not just one of the guys, he's the man running the show, employing other tax collectors to go out, other swindlers and crooks to go out and exploit you and me. Can you imagine what it would have been like to be Zacchaeus? Well, let's keep going. He wanted to see Jesus, who Jesus was, but being everybody say this word? Short. The Greek word there is mikros, from which we get the word microscope or microorganism. He is super tiny. And he could not because of the crowd. So what does he do? Let's Let's go to the next verse. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. Now, this is what happens in my mind. Zacchaeus is a wealthy man, and he's short. And he wants to see Jesus, and he can't, and so he goes and climbs a tree. Now ask yourself, what would it be like if you saw the wealthiest person you know tree climbing? I mean, this is what I see. I see Jesus is coming down the street, and there's a whole crowd of people that want to see him, and a Rolls Royce pulls up. And Zacchaeus isn't driving the Rolls Royce, he's in the back. It pulls over, the driver gets out and opens the door, and you can't even see the guy who gets out because the door's taller than he is. He's in a 3-piece Armani suit with cufflinks and gold chains and nice wingtip shoes. And he goes over and he starts climbing a tree, scratching the suit on the branches as he climbs. What would make a rich person go tree climbing? Well, you got to think inside of his profession. You hear stories. He's regularly visiting and interacting with people as he's taking money from them. And then, of course, when his other tax collector employees come back, they're going, you got to hear about this. And who do you think they've been hearing about? They've been hearing about Jesus. This is one of the thoughts that go through my mind. Just before this, in Luke chapter 18, there's a story of a blind man. I wonder if Zacchaeus went and he knocked on the door of a house getting ready to collect taxes. He bangs on the door and a guy goes, yes? This is Zacchaeus. Taxes are due. The guy says, well, come on in. And so Zacchaeus is standing there and he tries to open the door, and then the man opens the door on the inside, and the man has a glazed look as if he's looking right past Zacchaeus, as if he doesn't know that he's even there. Zacchaeus steps into the house and the curtains are drawn all the way across the place. You can barely see anything, but the man inside navigates the room with relative ease. And Zacchaeus says, your taxes are due. I'm here to collect my money. And the man on the inside says, I'm sorry, Mr. Zacchaeus, I have no money to give you. He says, well, you better give me your money now. And he says, I know you want money, I just have none. I'm blind. I haven't been able to see my whole life. I just got into town. This is all I have is this place to stay. Mr. Zacchaeus, I'm sorry, I don't have the money. Sir, I don't think you realize who I am. I understand you're new around here, but my name is Zacchaeus. I'm a chief tax collector, and you owe me my money. And the blind man says, Mr. Zacchaeus, listen, I don't know what kind of man you are, but would you be willing to give me 30 days? Just 30 more days is all I need. I don't know how I'll get it, but I'll get it for you. And Zacchaeus says, well, listen, I don't normally do this, but I'm going to have to take your house if you can't pay me the taxes. And it's going to take 30 days for me to get some appraisals on the property and figure some things out on my end. So you know what? I'll give you 30 days, but in 30 days, I'm coming back, and if you don't have my money, I will have your home. And Zacchaeus keeps on walking. 30 days pass. Zacchaeus is getting up. He's looking at the reflection in the water as he finishes out his tie, and he looks to himself and goes, well, it's time for me to go collect a house. There's no way that blind man could pay me back. And since there's no way to split a house 50-50, he's going to have to take the whole thing because he can't leave a guy with half a house. So what would have been just a small tax is now going to be a huge windfall for him because he's going to take the guy out for a portion of what he owed but get the whole property, and he only has to give the Roman government so much. What a shrewd businessman I am, Zacchaeus said to himself as he started to walk down the dusty road. And as he comes across the hill, what was once just this bleak house that had no color at all, looked like nobody cared for it, was beautifully painted. curtains that used to be covering the windows so no light got in were now open and fresh and beautiful. There's flowers painted along the walkway as he starts to go down, going, am I at the right house? And as he's getting ready to come to the house, the door flings open and these beautiful blue eyes like water pierce through him. And Zacchaeus said, I think I may have been at the wrong house. He goes, oh, I remember, hold on a second, I remember that voice. You must be Zacchaeus. You're here to collect my taxes, aren't you? Well, yes, I am. Oh, I've been expecting you. I can't thank you enough, Mr. Zacchaeus, for giving me 30 days. I have your money, it's right here. And he grabs a bag of money and he places it in Zacchaeus' hands. And Zacchaeus is going, what is happening? I was coming to foreclose on this property and now I'm getting paid? He says, are you the same blind man I met 30 days ago? So he goes, yes, I am. Well, tell me what happened. And the blind man said, well, I met Jesus and he gave me back my sight. I've been gainfully employed for 28 days. Just 2 days after you came by, I met Jesus and he healed me. That's what I think would make a rich man go tree climbing, is when somebody meets Jesus, you have to wonder what happened, and that's what happens. We find Zacchaeus up in a tree. Well, let's keep going further on in the story. So when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Do you notice something weird happens? Zacchaeus has never met Jesus. He's up in a tree, the super wealthy dude, and Jesus is just walking along, and when he reaches the spot, he just goes, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Even though Zacchaeus hasn't met Jesus, Jesus knew who Zacchaeus was. There was a word in there for absolutely every single one of you at all of our locations. Even if you don't know Jesus, Jesus knows you. The Bible tells us that the very hairs on our head are numbered. Ladies, that means that when you get out of the shower, he has done the math and knows how much is in the drain. After you're done getting dressed, he knows how much is left in the brush, and he knows how much is in your head. He knows you at a level that you can barely fathom. Guys, as you keep looking in the mirror and there is less and less hair up there, he knows exactly how many are left. He knows you, just like he knew Zacchaeus. And so Jesus starts to go to Zacchaeus' house, and look what happens next. Let's go to the next verse. So he came down at once, Zacchaeus, and welcomed him, Jesus, gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. I've heard this before from people in our community. I've met people who go to the crossing and they don't seem all that churchy. I've seen some of the people that call the crossing home and they give you guys a bad reputation. And you need to know when they tell me those things, I say good. Because that's where Jesus would be. He'd be with sinners and messed up people. If he didn't like sinners and messed up people, he wouldn't have liked me. I got permission to tell this story. I was at a hardware store in Macomb about 4.5 years ago. And you know, whenever you're at a hardware store, it's not because you're having a good day. Like, you never go to the hardware store because everything's working. Right? So like the first thing they should be, like when you walk into a hardware store, they shouldn't be, how can I help you? It should be like, I'm so sorry. That's how they should greet you. I get it. We're here to help. I'm in the aisle. I'm already wound up because that's how I get when there's a problem. And a guy comes at me and he starts chewing on me. He says, I'm a part of the community theater up in Macomb. And we were out there one day and a guy in a crossing hoodie with a smoke in one hand and a beer in the other came out with a crossing hoodie on and started cussing us out about parking on his grass. And he had a come join us at the crossing Easter sign in his yard. and you got people like that going to your church, how good can your church be? I can't believe somebody that goes to your church would behave like that. I just sat there and took it, or stood there and took it, because I didn't have the heart to tell him that the man he was complaining about was my father-in-law, who didn't go to our church at that time. But that crossing hoodie, we bought it for him because we're big fans of subliminal messages. And that yard sign that was placed in his yard, he didn't place it there. His wife did, who faithfully came to our church and served in our thrift store from day one. And what that fool didn't know is that my father-in-law was at advanced commitment night with his card filled out. And while Cherry was talking, his heart got moved. He crossed out what he had written, and he wrote something else, something bigger. And then at 11:30 at night, on advanced commitment night, after everybody's tired and gone to sleep, or at least trying, he's calling my wife up because he wants to know what chapter of the Bible Jerry taught on that night, and he wants me to explain to him what a talent is. You see, the world sees your past and your present, but God sees your potential. And man, while he was a messed up fool, giving us a bad reputation, he was proving that our God never quits on people and that there's got to be a place who's willing to take them while he hasn't quit on them yet. And that's why I love this place. So listen to me, if people give you slack for you going to a church with a bunch of sinners, you just look at them and say, I'm so glad they do. I'll take the bad reputation. Because that's where Jesus would be. He hangs out with sinners and messed up people, which means he's hanging out with you and me today. So Jesus goes into his house. Let's go to the next verse. Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount." And then look at what Jesus says. Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save what was lost." Every week when we've been going through this sermon series, we've been asking a series of questions. The first question is this: what was the roof? For Zacchaeus, it was all about compensation. He's the little guy with the jacked up truck. He's trying to prove to the rest of the world that he's bigger than everybody else thinks that he is. What would motivate a guy to betray his people and to exploit their poverty for his financial gain? A guy who had it in his mind, oh, you don't think much of me? I'll show you. You don't respect me yet, but you will respect me eventually. Motivated by compensation. Destined to prove everybody wrong and say, you were wrong about me. I'm more powerful. I'm more capable than you've ever realized. He's the kind of guy who brags about his income, brags about his car, brags about his house, brags about his kids, brags about his vacations, all to try and fill this void that was created somewhere in his past that made him feel unworthy and unloved. Zacchaeus was a compensator. And I wonder how many of us here are motivated by past experiences and living a life of compensation. The fastest way to get me to do something is to say this: I bet you can't fill in the blank. There is this switch that gets flipped in my brain that goes, I will show you. Some of us, we're trying to live a life of approval for the people that hurt us in our past. Maybe you've seen this happen. A couple gets divorced and all of a sudden one of them starts trying to buy really nice things so they look like their life is completely together, while the other person gets in the best shape they've ever been in their life to make the other person jealous about ever leaving them in the first place. Or maybe it happens inside of your home where there's a conversation about how well of a job one of you is doing at loving the kids, and so you don't start spending more time to love the kids. You spend more time with the kids to prove to your spouse that they were wrong about you. Your motivation isn't to love your kids better, it's to prove your spouse wrong, and you get in a bidding war for their hearts. You see, Zacchaeus was the kind of person who wasn't going to be denied. He wanted to get his, and he wanted to prove something to all the people around him. And so he was accumulating all of these things to try and fill a hole in his heart that ultimately only God could fill, and trying to fill a void that was put there by past circumstances. What are the things that we do in our life at all of our different locations that could be viewed as compensation? What are the things that we're trying to increase our status? Is it by where you live, or what you live in, or what you drive, or where you travel, or what you do? And how come we do that when we know that happiness flows out of contentment and peace? But why do we do so little to cultivate that? So what was wrecked? For Zacchaeus, what was wrecked were his plans, priorities, and his values. You don't choose the profession that he chose. You don't amass a fortune. You don't have a pattern of behavior without having a plan and prioritizing what you value. Some of you guys are like me. You have long-term plans, short-term plans, goals that you want to hit and achieve. By the time I want to be. And so he's been following this path. All these people are going to hate me, but that's okay because I'm going to be so rich that I can build a huge wall around my house and I'll never have to look at them. And it's tough when we have to realize what we actually value and what we actually prioritize. That's what's been happening in my life as I've been working through this commitment card. Is it's forcing me to answer an honest question. What do I really value? And when you start going through this and crunching things, you realize that there's a lot of stuff in your life that you value more than you thought you did. Because that's simply what this is. It's just a tool to figure out how much you value and what do you value. So what was the point of commitment? I'll tell you when it happened. The point of commitment happened when he had a genuine encounter with Jesus. Zacchaeus went from looking in a tree to having lunch with Jesus. Something special happens when you go from looking to having lunch. Something incredible happens when you take the opportunity to bring Jesus home. There's some of you right now at all of our different locations that you are looking at Jesus and he's ready to have lunch with you. He wants to sit down and he wants to hear what you're going through. He already knows what you've gone through, but he wants you to tell him, and he's ready to start that intimate personal relationship with each and every single one of you. Our primary goal during this Wreck the Roof initiative is for 100% of us to engage. For 100% of us to have the courage to sit down with God and say, God, what would it look like for me to wreck my roof? Help me to wreck my roof. That's what this is. It's having lunch with Jesus and saying, what would it look like for me to wreck the roof of my generosity? So what action was taken? A redirection in value. Zacchaeus went from caring about all of his material possessions to shaking it off because he realized that a Messiah was more important than money. He realized that his value is found in a relationship with Jesus instead of retaining possessions. He is the first century story of Ebenezer Scrooge, who turned a negative into a positive, but he didn't do it out of fear. He did it out of love, and love is so much more powerful than fear. Here's the crazy part. Zacchaeus takes an unbelievably huge faith-filled risk. He stands up and makes this proclamation. Half of whatever I have, I give to the poor, and if I wrong to anybody, I'll pay them back 4 times. Well, listen, to be a tax collector is to wrong people. And so now he's taking this huge risk because he's basically quadrupling his debt after he just cut his net worth in half. And he does it joyfully. Can you imagine all of his employees showing up for work on Monday? What? Can you imagine the meeting with the accountant? You idiot! You did what? But there's Zacchaeus, choosing Jesus as his highest value. What a witness. What a testimony he had. What was the result? The result's simple. It was salvation. Zacchaeus went from having shekels to having a Savior. He went from having gold to having God. He went from retaining possessions to a relationship with Jesus Christ. And then Jesus gives us insight into his mission, that he came to seek and save that which is lost. And there was a time in my life when I was lost. There was a time for many of you at our different locations when you were lost, and Jesus' mission was to never stop looking until he found you, and that is the mission of this church. I want you to hear a story from one of our own here at the 48th Street campus, Ryan and Jamie Taylor. And I want you to hear what they have been challenged by, this notion of wrecking the roof in the area of their generosity. Would you guys watch this video?
We are Ryan and Jamie Taylor. We go to 48th Street. We have 2 children. We've been coming to the Crossing for 14 years now. We started coming to the Crossing when our son was playing football at the YMCA. We met a young guy by the name of Josh Finkley, and he spent some time with us. Didn't really know he was a pastor till later on. We were just talking about careers one night. He asked me what I did. I asked him what he did. And then he invited us, and from the first time we went, we were hooked.
I came to know Christ in a different level. I really felt that from the very moment that we walked in the doors. And I've never felt that prior to coming to the Crossing. I realized how disobedient I was being to God and not joyfully tithing. My husband always tithed. I never wanted to. Never felt the need to. So it wasn't until God really broke my heart, tearfully sobbing broke my heart, and made me realize how disobedient I was, and just made me trust him that when I'm giving, that he's gonna do greater things than I can ever imagine.
When we went to the Crossing, that's when I started learning about the Word of God, and I started understanding things. So everything that I've learned about the Bible and God and Jesus has come from my church. That's where it's come from. So the Crossing has taught me everything. So they did a sermon on tithing. I heard it, I understood it, I believed it because I believe everything that's in there, so I started tithing. And that's just what you're supposed to do, so I started doing it. Well, I did have a pretty large gambling problem at one point throughout my life, and I had to work on that to get through it. And through that, even when I wasn't able to, God still provided. So I know there's reassurance there that when you go through things that are difficult, you just start to see the provisions that he gives you over and over again. So I'm pretty confident all the time that he's going to provide. I just have zero fear in it. I think the potential for Wreck the Roof, what we can do as a group, not just as a family, but everyone, if our mindset is all the same and we're following Jesus and we're trusting that Jesus is going to do with it what Jesus is going to do, and we're all okay with that, we can't go wrong.
I think for me, part of the Wreck the Roof that touches me is campuses, more campuses, more places for people like me 14 years ago to go to and feel comfortable walking in as I am. Just being comfortable in my own skin, walking in, worshiping however I want to worship, and just hearing the true Word of God. I just think that that's an important thing, that we're reaching these people, and we're placing churches in places where people never think of. Being different and just going out there and just trusting God that these churches are just going to reach people like our family.
Just since the time that we've been coming to the Crossing, people who didn't have a personal relationship with Jesus include myself, my son, my daughter, my mother, my father, her aunt, her niece, cousins, they've all been baptized at the crossing. This is where we spend our time because God's moving through the church and has been moving ever since we've been there. God provides, God expands. We just load the bar, He does the lifting. That's how we do it. Our church will not make a mistake with what they're doing, with what we give them, because they're following God, and God doesn't make mistakes.
I am so thankful for their willingness to share their story because it inspires me, and I know that God is writing a story in each and every single one of your hearts. One of the things I think about in that video is I wonder if Zacchaeus went home, I wonder how many of his family found a relationship with Jesus because he found it. I wonder how many people could trace their relationship with Jesus Christ back to a sinner that nobody thought Jesus should hang out with. Here's the deal. Zacchaeus made a decision that Jesus and his mission was more important than anything else that he had in his life. And he sets before you and I a tremendous example to follow. I want you guys to think about that as we move to this time of decision.
In all my years in the church, one of the things that I hear the most from new people is when they say, at first I didn't want to come. I thought the roof would cave in on me. Nobody knows what I've done or how terrible I've been. There's no way that God could accept me. I'm sure many of you have heard that. Maybe some of you are watching online right now because you think the same thing. When I hear that, this is the story that I think about. It was a wonder Zacchaeus didn't think the tree he climbed up on wouldn't fall just at the sight of Jesus. He'd done some terrible things, things that he thought disqualified him from seeing and experiencing Jesus like everyone else. So he climbed up the tree and watched everyone else welcome Jesus, trying to imagine that experience that everyone else was having, knowing that he couldn't have it because of who he was. Then Jesus rocked his world. With so many people lining the streets, calling his name, Jesus exposed Zacchaeus in the tree. Like a deer in the headlights, he was caught, probably thought of running away. And then Jesus says, Zacchaeus, you come down. I'm staying at your house today. In front of everyone, Jesus showed Zacchaeus that he belonged, that he wasn't disqualified like he thought, that Jesus knew him and loved him and wanted to spend time with him. Right now, no matter where your circumstances are, your past, the things that you have done, Jesus is looking at you and saying, you come down. Staying at your house today. Jesus wants one thing, an intimate personal relationship with you. It's time to get down from the tree. It's time to quit disqualifying yourself because of the mistakes that you've made and let Jesus into your heart. He's asking you right now to open the door and let him in. So what are you going to do? I'll be here in the prayer room ready to pray with you. Don't be the rich young ruler today and walk away sad. Be Zacchaeus. Accept the invitation and renew yourself in Jesus. Let's go to him.
I cast my mind to Calvary, when Jesus bled and died for me. I see his wounds, his hands, his feet, my Savior on that cursed tree. His body bound and drenched in tears, they laid him down in Joseph's tomb, the entrance sealed by heavy stone, Messiah still and all alone. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For in I will rise among the saints, my gaze transfixed on Jesus' face. Jesus, you are our risen King, our perfect healer, spotless Lamb. Father, I am so grateful for the grace, the mercy, and the kindness that you pour out upon us. Father, as we continue to sing, oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Let it reign in our hearts. Let the love you have for us swell up inside of us, and let us give all of that to you, all the glory to the name Jesus Christ. When we say for endless days, let that reign every moment of our lives. Father, we sing to you with everything we have. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. Oh, praise the name of the Lord our God. Oh, praise his name forevermore. For endless days we will sing your praise. Oh Lord our God. Oh Lord our God.
You came for criminals and every Pharisee. You came for hypocrites and even one like me. You carried sin and shame, the guilt of every man, the weight of all I've done, nailed into your hand. And oh, your love bled for me. And oh, your blood in crimson streams. And oh, your death is hell's defeat. A cross meant to kill is my victory. Oh, your amazing grace, I've seen and tasted it. It's running through my veins. I can't escape its grip. In you, my soul is safe. You cover everything. And oh, your love bled for me. And oh, your blood in crimson streams. And oh, your death is hell's defeat. A cross meant to kill is my takes away our sin, who takes away our sin. The Holy Lamb of God makes us alive again, makes us alive again. Behold the Lamb of God who takes away our sin, who takes away our sin. The Holy Lamb of God makes us alive again, makes us alive again. And know your love bled for me, and know your blood in crimson streams, and know your death is hell to free. A cross meant to kill is my victory. Know your love bled for me. Know your blood in crimson streams, and know your death is hell to free. A cross meant to kill is my victory. Oh, a cross meant to kill is my victory.
Jesus didn't let anyone disqualify themselves from a relationship with him. He showed us that by his sacrifice on the cross. He shed his blood to build a bridge to our Father that would withstand anything. There's nothing in this world that can separate us from the love of God. We spend time every week remembering that by taking communion. So spend these next few moments in prayer, contemplating the love that Jesus has for you and how you can spend your days honoring that sacrifice. Thank you so much for joining with us today. If you have any questions, you can get in touch with me by emailing joeyh@thecrossing.net for any questions or just to continue the conversation. Also, make sure to hit the give button at the top of the screen, or you can text to The Crossing Online to 77977 to give right from your phone. Thanks for coming, and I'll see you next week.